I open the hearing on House Bill 1792, prohibiting school districts and personnel from the instruction of critical race theory and LGBTQ plus ideologies in schools, as well as establishing a private right of action for violations. And I call on Representative Belcher to introduce his bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Representative Mike Belcher, representing Carroll 4 out of Wakefield. I am happy to be here to present this afternoon. And this one, unlike the last, is my bill. There should be no confusion that this bill is indeed named for Charlie Kirk, activist, founder of Turning Point USA, husband, father, and Christian. I personally see Turning Point USA foremost as a Christian apologetics ministry. Charlie Kirk was murdered. He was assassinated. He is a martyr for the faith. This bill is tied to Charlie Kirk in two distinct but very important ways. First, this bill contains the sort of thing that Charlie was frequently driving toward in his activism and his attempt to bring everything that he was into the public and civic realms. Second, this bill seeks to curb the indoctrination into hatreds and divisions of critical theory that fueled Charlie Kirk's assassin and fuels left-wing violence nationwide. Recent incidents are very, very many. Unfortunately, we know this. Over 300 attacks on pro-life pregnancy centers since 2022, largely attributed to the Marxist anti-fascist group Jane's Revenge. 2025, for the first time in the history or modern history of CSIS analysis, left-wing ideological attacks outnumbered attacks from the right. And mind you that this is an organization that finds an awful lot of ways to attribute things to the right. Charlie Kirk was murdered by a perpetrator, alleged perpetrator, steeped in anti-fascist action ideology, now a designated terrorist organization, steeped in queer theory narratives, ties to a group called Armed Queers SLC, a Cuban intelligence-trained terrorist group. He scrawled, "Hey, fascist, catch," on the cartridges he used to kill Charlie. But Charlie's not alone in this violence we have seen. Our president has endured not less and probably more than 2 assassination attempts. Butler Rally 24 and 24, the golf course incident. He caught a bullet in the ear. Repeated shooting and vehicular attacks on ICE facilities and personnel. The 2020 Summer of Love. Dozens were murdered in mob violence, some burned alive in arson fires. Billions of damage done, led by the openly Marxist, critical race theory-inspired leaders of Black Lives Matter. Violent pro-Hamas campus occupations have occurred all around us, including in this state. How many here knew that the Palestinian Leadership Organization, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, is actually a Marxist-Leninist organization and a named terror group? Antifa-linked assaults on conservative events and speakers have been commonplace for years. It happened here too, to a gay conservative, Dave Rubin at UNH. Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles and others were frequently harassed and frequently the subject of violence when visiting our campuses and our schools. This very committee has heard testimony for years from conservatives on school campuses that they're fearful to express their sincerely held beliefs on their campus due to the constant threats of ostracization, ooh, that's a mouthful, academic punishment looming, and violence against them and their property. Statistics provided by the UNH Police Department demonstrate a pattern of strong enforcement actions against conservative groups, while seemingly left-wing causes have carte blanche. So let's get into the details here. The roots of critical theory. Critical theory originates in Karl Marx, a couple quotes from Marx. The ruthless criticism of all that exists, and as he was fond of doing, quoting Mephistopheles from Faust, all that exists deserves to perish. Marx was not an economist, despite what people may have heard. Marx was a prophet of the socialist faith. When his prophecies failed to materialize, notably the prediction that socialism and communism would rapidly come in advanced capitalist societies in the West, and they didn't go socialist, but backwater Russia did, this disenchanted many faithful socialists and communists. They split the Church of Socialism into different denominations, taking different paths. One pathway was charted by Giovanni Gentili and Mussolini, two disenchanted communists who then developed fascist theory around a national socialism, which was a heresy to international communists. In Germany, the Marxists of the Frankfurt School retooled Marx's dialectical materialism into a dialectical identitarianism, abandoning their revolutionary hopes in the middle class and shifting toward race Marxism, sex Marxism, and cultural Marxism. Developed by Frankfurt School in Germany, but relocated to Columbia University upon the rise of Hitler as America took them in to give them refuge. Formalized in Max Horkheimer's 1937 essay distinguishing critical theory, which is revolutionary, aimed at systems change, radically subjective and akin to a religious prophecy, from traditional theories, which are objective, descriptive, and science-based. Herbert Marcuse, Repressive Tolerance, 1965, and Counter-Revolution and Revolt, 1972, argued for intolerance of all actions and speech from the right, and tolerance of all actions and speech from the left, became known as liberating tolerance. It has signaled radical revolutionaries to abandon their overt campaigns of terrorism and bombings of the 60s and begin the long march into the institutions targeting foremost the teachers' colleges. Named examples of some who followed in this path were the Weather Underground bombers Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn. Later, Angela Davis, one-time presidential candidate for the Communist Party of America, tied to the Black Panthers, was also readily welcomed into academia and the education fields. Now, I won't go much further, but there is much further that could be gone on in this path, so I would simply point you to a resource if you want to look into this. Look at The Critical Turn in Education by Alan Gultzman. An avowed socialist, communist educator himself, he documented the rise of critical theories in the teachers' colleges from the 1980s, beginning with people like Derek Bell at Harvard and critical race theory, through the early 2000s. Critical race theory, critical legal theory, and intersectionality have their modern origins at Harvard University, Harvard Law, Harvard's Teacher College, Columbia's Teacher College, and the University of Wisconsin, from where they spread to every state in the nation, largely enabled by federal legislation and rules. The result, a Marxian framework, repackaging class struggle into identity oppression, dividing into oppressor and oppressed, and breeding resentment and violence. The current American education paradigm is extremely comparable to Mao Zedong's creation of the Red Guard under the Chinese Cultural Revolution, with their privileged categories and oppressed categories.
Point of order. What's your point of order?
I don't think this is addressing the bill.
He's giving the background for the bill.
The back one has gone over 10 minutes now.
The prime sponsor has leeway to discuss this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With their privilege categories and oppressed categories, as is frequently stated by CCP survivor Lily Tang Williams, with identity provisions nearly also identical to Soviet Bolshevik paradigms, both emphasizing ethnic privilege to divide populations, consolidate power, and resulting in countless deaths via mob actions. Of course, the modern forms of indoctrination and division take up the most public relations and human resources friendly terminology, hiding a long history of atrocity in words such as equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So this bill, to defeat any allegations that it might not be specific enough, it might be vague. First, it targets specific pedagogies and practices by name. Gloria Ladson building culturally responsive pedagogy and windows and doors theory inverts sympathy building and common humanity by teaching students to identify with only those matching their identity traits, skin color, sexuality, so on. It narrows the range of sympathy for fellow Americans, and it fuels identity politics and division. Ladson Billings wrote the book on importing critical theories into American education. This division has been documented in surveys showing greater intergroup preferences among every minority group in the nation, and is likewise fueling a terrible rise in white identitarianism among young men. Queer theory, Marxist feminism, and intersectionality import Marxist analysis as admitted in the primary textbook for critical race theory to portray norms as violent oppression and openly seek the destruction of the family and the expulsion of the father from it. Paulo Freire, the most cited academic in American colleges of education, imports Marxism via liberation theology, redefines literacy as political activism. He so catastrophically damaged the education in his native country of Brazil, he was thrown out of the country before he became a favorite among American teachers' colleges. So let's talk about the elephants in the room and the difficulties that prior legislation has had. Prior law was struck down for vagueness. Charlie Act has clear definitions, targets indoctrination only, not factual discussions. It defines the prohibitions named by pedagogy and praxis, by academic lineage, and in specific practices. Nothing vague. There's going to be an argument made that it infringes on teachers' freedom of speech. I am here to say there is no such thing as a freedom to say whatever you want to other people's children who are held as a captive audience and compelled to attend. The reality is, and this is not a slight by any means, I'm going off of technical definitions here. Educators are definitionally appointed bureaucrats. They must follow the policy set by the elected legislature, not push ideology. That is how this country is supposed to function. You might say the penalties are too harsh, but I've made them purposely not harsh. The penalties involved, rather than penalties, actually prefer remediation and warnings over any kind of employment actions. The possibility of receiving compensatory damages are not immediate. They would actually require that you prove a demonstrable harm that is worth a certain amount of money up to the limit of $10,000. You might say it's not happening in New Hampshire. I would say the walkouts happening this week, along with a slew of documented materials that I have seen, demonstrate beyond any doubt it is here. Presidential executive orders have ordered DEI provisions to be stripped from practice by states, and those that do not may be at risk of losing federal funds. I would also note there's no issue with the fiscal note and budget, as the prior legislation that was on the books that was struck down was already budgeted for. And this requires nothing further as far as personnel or hours or anything else. So the money was already in the budget. In closing, I want to tell you just a real quick piece from what happened in this committee 2 years ago. We were hearing a bill, and I was on the other side of this. I was over at the end here. And it was a bill having to do with things of DEI and equity and things of that nature. We had some representatives from the university system come. During my questioning, I brought up Marxism. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember I brought up Marxism. When the testimony was over, the bill hearing was closed, and people were leaving, two representatives of the DEI office at the university system approached me at my seat. And one of them said to me, "You think you know Marxism, little boy? I studied in Germany." With that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Murray.
Thank you. I do have a question. In your policy on line 7, you state, quote, respect for the Constitution. And I am curious to know whether or not that definition has, or whether or not that is defined anywhere.
Thank you. That's one of those things that I don't think there's any need for a significant definition for. I think we can all work out what a basic level of respect for the Constitution is, and as long as it doesn't include things like the overthrow of the Constitution or the things like that, it would probably be okay.
Is that a true follow-up?
It is a true follow-up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess my curiosity is whether or not that would include difficult discussions on things like Plessy versus Ferguson and the overruling of Brown versus the Board of Education, poll taxes, reading tests to gain access to the ballot box, things that are really difficult in nature.
Yes, of course those are allowed. 100%. There's nothing at all that prohibits factual discussions about this nation's history, including some of our more shameful periods, as long as they're not undertaken with the purpose of critical theory to create a modern day division between people. That's what's prohibited, not discussions about history.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. You had made a statement, and there is a question that goes with this, about how people have claimed that these things aren't happening in New Hampshire. Have you heard or seen about the Wheel of Privilege that appeared in the Manchester School District?
Yes, I have, and it's not specifically mentioned in this legislation, but things like that are identified as, so the whole dialectical worldview of this postmodern Marxism, it requires you to look at people based on, at any given time, as either wholly oppressor or wholly oppressed. And it causes you to lose your human sympathy for anybody who might be on the oppressor side of the equation, even if they're not personally responsible, because it's not about personal responsibility, it's about identity characteristics. So that would, in fact, be prohibited under this.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am curious to know, there is another line in this document that references lenses of inherent oppression and liberation narratives. How do you separate one from the other?
Can you clarify, are you asking me how you separate liberation and oppression? So in this, what we're talking about is liberation and oppression narratives according to critical theory. We're not talking about all narratives such as, we can go back and talk about how the Jews were horribly oppressed by Egypt, right? But as long as we're not applying a critical theory lens to that teaching, there would be nothing to prohibit such a topic.
Representative Kluger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. On page 3 at the top, Roman numeral 4, public schools shall prioritize curriculum and instruction in. Where's the history, the world languages, or other sciences other than STEM?
You said history, world languages, and other science. Well,
Other than the STEM sciences,
Sure.
because,
So-
in elementary school, for example, or middle school, there's other science courses that would be taught currently.
Yeah, so oftentimes history education is part of civics education. That falls under the same kind of the history of the U.S. and the civics of the U.S. often go together. We've seen that with the curriculum we passed through here a couple of years ago. To science, well, STEM is science, technology, engineering,
Right.
and mathematics. So all sciences would be captured under that abbreviation. I forget, was there another one you asked?
Well, I was thinking world languages.
World languages, there's nothing wrong with teaching world languages, and it certainly can be useful, and I think they should keep doing it, but it's not a core subject to an education.
Follow up?
follow up?
It would be required, though, in some universities.
That's fine.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, I should mention, I'm sorry. This carves out, this has nothing to do with secondary education. Does not apply to the university system, does not apply to home education, does not apply to private schools.
Representative Murray.
That brings me to another thought. Do you have any evidence of critical race theory being taught in an elementary school?
I don't know that I have evidence of it being taught in elementary school or not. I certainly have evidence of it being taught in schools in general within the state of New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Balboni. You mentioned slews, I believe, of examples. Do you have a listing of examples of these activities that you say are going on in New Hampshire schools that we can look at?
I don't have a listing handy on me, but I'm certain that I or others that are interested would be happy to provide a plethora of examples.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. All further testimony will be limited to 3 minutes and questions are allowed. So Representative Horgan. R. Oh. Yes. You can't not allow questions.
Thank you very much. I'm Representative Timothy Horgan from Stratford County District 10, the town of Durham, which is the home of the University of New Hampshire. First of all, I guess Representative Belcher gave a very, very thorough explanation, and I learned, amongst other things, well, there was a lot of it I either didn't follow or the parts I could follow, I think were contrary to what my beliefs and what my experience and what my study had told me. But he did tell me about two theorists I'd actually never heard of before, Gloria Ladson-Billings and Kimberly Crenshaw. So I'll have to check out their work. It sounds like it might be interesting. And as I said, I went to Columbia University. I really don't remember being taught much of any of the things that supposedly I was taught when I was there. Of course, I was only a B student, so maybe some of it was going over my head. They did try to teach me in a philosophy class some Hegel. Maybe I'm not very smart, so I didn't get it. We did teach some Marx, and that was whatever you think of, like what others have done and attached the word Marxism. Marxism to him, he's still a pretty interesting. He's still a pretty interesting thinker. He was definitely. Whether you want to claim he's not an economist, he was definitely a brilliant political scientist and economic historian. So his work, there are some things in there which are still of interest today. So I would just say, first of all, the whole background to the bill, I respectfully disagree with the whole narrative, a very long narrative that we got. I think most of it, at least, contrary to what I understood. Although, as I said, I was just a B student. Maybe they tried to teach me some things that I didn't get. And certainly, I guess I'm on the progressive side. I guess I'm a leftist. My country was founded in a revolution, and probably a lot of us saw the TV series called The American Revolution. And certainly, we found out back then that race was an issue back then, class was an issue back then. Those things have been part of our American history since the revolution and before. And there were even LGBTQ people who were involved in the revolution. So I think there's probably really very little reason to go forward with this bill. If you do like this bill, one thing where they worded it, go all the way to page 4, lines 5 through 7, and they actually did bring up the topic of the EFA program. So they does recognize that that's another new means of public education, and they give an exemption for public institutions, higher education, private schools, or homeschools, then whether or not such homeschools are participating in the EFA program. So you can't sue an individual family for teaching their children critical race theory, but it's unclear what happens if a private school who does it. So anyway, I would just say, interesting bill. I learned a lot from reading the findings. I'm definitely going to check out Paulo Freire and Gloria Ladson Billings and Kimberly Crenshaw. But aside from that, I personally have no interest in voting for this bill when it comes to the floor. So I would just say I deal it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Representative Horgan. Will you take questions?
Looks like there's one.
Yes, Representative Selig.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. If we look at page 1, line 6, the bill says that we'll prepare students for productive citizenship. Could you please define what you think productive citizenship means?
Well, it's I guess it to be a informed citizenship with so certainly somebody who has a full understanding of the issues that they'll have to deal with when dealing with other people in their society, and also so it's more than just those skills, but you need an understanding of history, understanding the origins of your society. So that's as I said, I'm against the bill, so I'm not sure exactly what was intended by the term productive citizenship, but that certainly is I think everybody agrees that's the purpose of education, is to create productive citizens. So
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative, for taking my question. You had cited the importance of learning about Marxists and Marxism as a historical or as his time as an economist. Are you aware, beginning on page 2, line 31, that section 3, Roman numeral 3, it says specifically, this section shall not prohibit, delineates quite a few things, but A, the very first thing, is factual or neutral instruction on historical events, including Marxism, and so what you learned could still be discussed in school?
Well, I suppose. Well, I agree. I agree with your interpretation of what that paragraph says, and that I'm not sure why they're dragging Marx's theory. So Marx is part of he's a historically significant thinker, but he actually did his work almost 100 years after the United States of America became the United States of America. So I'm not sure, but what's neutral, what's factual, those are somewhat vague terms. And of course, like myself, like everyone else, I sort of assume that what I'm inclined to believe is what's factual, and then what's neutral. And people of different points of view, I tend to feel that they're maybe not as neutral as I am, but that's pretty much just I'm a human being. That's how everybody thinks of themselves in relationship to the rest of the world. So thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much, Representative Horgan. Representative Sam Farrington.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee. I am here in support of the bill, although I don't think that it goes far enough. This should apply to our higher institutions of education as well, I believe. Just this past semester, in one of my classes, I was being taught that I must be an anti-racist, and that it is not simply good enough to be against racism, but in fact, you have to take an active role in fighting racism, which seems good, unless the professor is saying that the white people are always the racists, and that goes to the very heart of this bill, which is this critical theory that there is always one oppressor class and one oppressed class, and that those are the situations 100% of the time, which is unequivocally not true. And so when we have our higher institutions of education teaching us this, it does not create educated citizens in our state of New Hampshire. It creates the opposite. And we've seen this over the past decades. The Marxists have captured our institutions, especially the educational system, and they have weaponized it, and they are fighting a psychological war right now against our young people. I saw it in high school, and it's certainly being carried out. And so, like I said, I support the bill. I think it should go further. And with that, I would take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Representative Farrington. Representative Balboni.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. As you
offered up that you feel that this is being offered at higher education. You do realize that this bill does not apply to higher education, so I will reference what you just said, referencing your high school and your public school education, where you say that this was happening where you were being taught, and I'm wondering if you could give me specific examples of that.
I understand it's not being applied to colleges. I think that it should. So maybe the committee perhaps should amend the bill. But in high school, we were learning about indigenous people and the history of our country and what we've done. And yeah, there are some dark points in our history, but that should have been taught through a matter of fact and history, not through the teacher's perspective that white people are dangerous and oppressors because certain people in the past have done this. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous ideology.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Nancy Brennan?
Good afternoon. Nancy Brennan, again from Ware, retired teacher. Thank you for taking my testimony. I speak in opposition to this bill, the Charlie Act. Charlie Kirk was idolized by those on the right and sought to bring young people to a culturally conservative Christian nationalist point of view. This bill seeks to turn public education into a right-leaning institution while muzzling teachers, erasing identities, and telling a slanted view of history. The bill talks about prohibiting indoctrination, and yet to teach without acknowledging various lenses through which we view the world is itself indoctrination. Accepting Charlie's words as absolute truth is indoctrination. He said some pretty nasty things about certain minorities, and his methods included half-truths and bullying. Certainly not a good foundation for teaching. The bill is convoluted and unclear, making it easy for teachers to trip up and do the wrong thing, while they may just be trying to help kids learn to think for themselves. What is, for instance, patriotic disposition? Is it blind faith supporting everything our country does, from slavery to the killing of innocents at home and abroad? Or is it the belief that this country stands for a grand ideal and that we can help move forward by supporting what works, but also by standing up and speaking out against attacks by those in power on the tenets of our Constitution? Is it patriotic to teach our students they should go along with an administration that is erasing stories of diverse communities to a point that only white, straight men in our history are to be honored and remembered? Would I be fired or fined for teaching alternative points of view like those Howard Zinn wrote about, or for doing one of the many lessons I used to do where I asked my students to put themselves in someone else's shoes? The point of HB 1792 seems to be indoctrination of the worst kind, not education at its best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you. Anne Marie Banfield.
Good afternoon, Anne Marie Banfield, parental rights advocate, focused on excellence in education. I see this bill similar to RSA 191:1, the advocacy of subversive doctrines that are prohibited. No teacher shall advocate communism as a political doctrine. So we already have that in state statute. What is mentioned in this bill are political issues. They're political. History should always be taught on race, slavery, and all those important historical events. But there is a crossover when it becomes anti-racist. That is a political ideology. And it also, anti-racism pushes racism. If you understand what anti-racism is about, this comes from liberation theology. It's a theology. Some of it comes from a theological belief. So you're looking for some examples. SAU 16 bought a book called "This Book is Anti-Racist" for all of their students in the middle school. I think they spent about $17,000, and that's when it was presented to me by a parent who was concerned. Again, would his child be considered an oppressor or the oppressed? Because that's what it pushed in the book. Schools should be politically neutral if they are truly inclusive. When I walk into this building, I don't feel like somebody's pushing their political ideology on us. And we are sitting here and going through a democratic process. I would also argue if this is not the way to go, then maybe we ought to look at viewpoint discrimination. Because what happens a lot of times is this information is fed to our students, and then if you want other information brought into the classroom, you're told no. I was told no in SAU 621 when the teachers were going to do a professional development on transgender students. And I went and met with the superintendent, and I said, can we bring in other viewpoints other than just Seacoast outright? The answer was no. They were not going to present other viewpoints. And guess how? I didn't know about this professional development. It was a teacher who contacted me who was bothered by what they were going to have to do in professional development, that it was going to be one viewpoint pushed on them. It wasn't going to be inclusive. There was going to be no, viewpoint neutrality where we're going to get other viewpoints. This is not inclusive. It crosses over to pushing a worldview and denying others that want to be presented. You want some other examples? Second Step SEL. That's got critical race theory, gender. I've got others. I will send them to you in an email. There's plenty of examples because I get plenty of calls on this. Although I have to say, some of it has died down. I think over the years, some of this has died down. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. All right, Robert, and your last name starts with an L, and your handwriting's as good as mine.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Wallace. I'm a former active duty vet, retired software developer, former EMT, and I'll try to keep this short. My father was a teacher and a principal for a total of 40 plus years. So I know a lot about teachers. I've spent a lot of time around them outside of school. And the reality is they just want to teach the right stuff 99% of the time. I'm not sure what why it is that the legislature seems to feel the need to get involved with developing curricula. There's no need for it. There's professionals out there with far more education and far more ability, far more experience to know how to teach children. I don't believe, and I don't know, there's no way to just call BS on some of the things I've heard about what's being taught where. Those are issues for the local school boards. Everyone seems to be, let's push things to the local level. Well, do that. Worry about problems with what's being taught at schools with the local school boards. Bring it up with them. We don't need to be spending legislative time micromanaging school administrations, do we? Aren't there more important things that can be done by the legislator? We don't have, you try to jam a lot of stuff into 2 months. So I would let schools deal with that. That's what I'd like to say. I'd like some examples too. There were no examples given of, or no good ones, of what's being taught that's so egregious about critical race theory. We did get quite a long homage to Charlie Kirk, but that didn't really do a whole lot in terms of giving us some more information about what's going on in schools or what you think ought to be going on in schools that's not going on now. Representative Belcher mentioned that this stuff pushes division. Really? One of the most divisive things I've heard lately seemed to come out of an article that I'd seen where I thought it was the chair of one of these committees thought they ought to segregate Democrats and Republicans, teach them separately. What about independents? We're going to build some new schools for independent children? I don't know. Makes sense. Guess we ought to do that. I'm just going to end this by saying this isn't your job. You have a job. Do your job. Worry about legislating to help families in this state. Pardon? I'm just looking around. Is that okay?
He's fine.
Thanks. Awesome. Time's up.
Anything else? Are you done? Or do you have more?
I am done. I'm glad, Mr. Belcher, that you didn't ask us to get on your knees and say a prayer for
All
Charlie.
right, thank you very much. Rachel Potter?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, for the record, my name is Rachel Potter, and I'm a policy associate at the ACLU of New Hampshire. HB 1792 is a classroom censorship bill that is also unconstitutionally vague. It bans teaching broad and undefined ideas like, quote, critical theories, identity-based ideologies, or instruction said to promote division, dialectical worldviews, or anti-constitutional indoctrination. But the bill does not clearly define these terms. That leaves educators guessing about what is allowed and what could cost them their jobs, their licenses, or expose them to lawsuits. As I said in my testimony on the prior bill, we have already seen how this plays out. Similar laws passed in New Hampshire in 2021 and 2025 were struck down or blocked by federal courts because they were vague and involved arbitrary enforcement. HB 1792 repeats the same legal flaws and is likely to face the same fate. HB 1792 invites government censorship of ideas into public school classrooms. The First Amendment does not permit the state to ban or restrict viewpoints simply because they are controversial or politically disfavored. When the government starts drawing lines around which ideas are acceptable, it risks unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination. This bill also raises clear due process problems. Laws must give people fair notice of what is prohibited. When terms are vague, educators are left guessing. That leads to self-censorship. That chilling effect on speech is itself a constitutional harm. The Constitution protects free speech, academic freedom, and equal treatment under the law, and this bill puts all three of those things at risk. I also urge you to remember that a broader principle is at stake. When the government starts banning broad categories of ideas in classrooms, it sets a precedent that should give us all pause. Today, it may be one set of ideas, but tomorrow it could be another. For these reasons, we urge you to oppose HB 1792. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Representative Murray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Initially, upon the sponsor's introduction of the bill, I thought that I had heard the sponsor mention that it was just sort of more of a carrot than a stick. And then I noticed that in subsection 7, starting on line 31 on page 3, that there is in fact injunctive court relief. And so I am curious to know whether or not there is a fiscal note similar to the previous bill that would address an increase in litigation, because it doesn't look like there is anything here anticipating that that could possibly be the case. Do you have any indication of that?
I believe the fiscal note does state that the Department of Justice may need an additional full-time attorney, but I would defer to them on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Representative Selig? Sorry.
Sorry, thank you. Looking at that same section about an aggrieved person, including a student or parent may bring a civil action, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry, thank you for letting me ask my question, and thank you for taking my question, to go backwards for a moment. But in that section, would the way this is phrased, would the aggrieved person be, say, someone who overheard someone talking in a supermarket? Like, is there any specificity about the person having any actual personal impact as a result, or just they might have heard that this, I'm trying to understand if it's limited to those or if it's broader than the parent and child.
Sure. I mean, I think that our concern is the vague nature of the bill itself. So I would just reiterate that can create constitutional problems. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Oh, Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I'm curious if there were a particular part of the bill that you found as vague. I know the First Circuit has held up the previous divisive concepts ban as being vague, and that was much shorter, as you put into the budget bill. This appears to me to be much lengthier. Was there a specific line that was vague?
Sure. I mean, I would refer to the beginning of my testimony when I talked about the broad and undefined ideas, like critical theories, identity-based ideologies, dialectical worldviews. All of that anti-constitutional indoctrination is not defined further. So,
If I may have a true follow-up, I understand you're a legal organization primarily. The prime sponsor had indicated that because it was a budget bill, some of those litigation costs were accounted for in that budget cycle. If that is such the case, then where would you indicate there'd be an increased litigation cost if it's already been accounted for?
So I'm just reading the fiscal note, but again, I would defer to the Department of Justice to speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
The Department of Justice is here and can address some of your questions. Deborah House?
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Deborah House. I am president of the American Federation of Teachers, New Hampshire. We've got 3,500 members across the state, mostly in pre-K through 12 public education. And no surprise, we do oppose HB 1792. The previous speaker made many of the points I was going to make about how this bill is indeed unconstitutionally vague, similar to the divisive concept law that was passed back in 2021 and overturned by the courts. A few points I want to elaborate on. The bill does censor core academic content. And one of the reasons it's vague is not that it lacks in naming political theories or frameworks that it wants to prohibit, but the vagueness comes in that educators would not know in the classroom exactly what was allowed and what wasn't in their daily teaching, in classroom discussions, in responding to events that students bring in and should be allowed to be discussed in class. At what point do you have to say, stop, I can't talk about that anymore with you, or allow you to continue that discussion among your peers, even though it's really relevant to what we were studying, because we might violate the law and I could get sued. That's not good education. So that's where the vagueness comes. You don't know where that bright line is. If something happens that might be related to Brown versus Board of Education, for instance, even though that's history, at what point is history done and no longer has an impact in the current day? That's where the vagueness is. If you can't tell where that bright line is, you don't really know what is prohibited. So that was part of Local 8027 versus Ada Blue. Anyway, so it censors core academic content. It violates the state's constitutional duty to cherish public education because it narrows what can be studied rather than broadening it, what students may learn. The bill also harms safe learning environments, especially for LGBTQ students who are indeed in our schools and deserve to be safe and welcome just as all other students deserve. The bill enacts viewpoint discrimination, banning certain perspectives while promoting so-called neutral and patriotic ones. And that's another place where the law is vague, because If we went around this room, we would not all agree on what neutral or patriotic meant. Our definitions would not be exactly the same. And if we can't all agree on exactly what that means, how is a teacher in the moment going to be able to define that and know what is allowed and what is not? This bill, if passed, is setting you up for more legal challenges, for more cost, and for more diversion of funds that should be going into strengthening our public schools for all students. So for those reasons, we oppose it, and we hope you find it inexpedient to legislate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative
Yes.
Dry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for taking my question.
Okay.
In other bills unrelated to education,
Yep.
sometimes there is a safe harbor for people or companies, for example, saying you did the best of your ability not to violate something, and it was you were acting in good faith on things. Would that apply in this case, maybe to help teachers?
It did not apply in the law that you passed previously. I do not see anything written in here that would indicate that, so we don't have any reason to believe it would. You'd have to give us something that would indicate that.
Thank you.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I am curious, on page 3, section 4, lines 3 through 8, do you believe that that is accurately capturing the definition of an adequate education?
I did not bring a copy of the bill up with me, so, yeah.
I'm happy to.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I'll speak it.
Yep.
The section.
Yeah. Yeah, that is not as much as is enumerated in the, and I'm not going to have the citation right on the top of my head. So the other list that we normally refer to in the other section of law, and I'm sorry, without my notes in front of me with that number, I'm not going to pull it up. But yeah, it is missing some pieces there. I'm not seeing as much history and social studies enumerated the way it usually is, so I think it's light there. I do see civics is there, which is good. I think we're missing some of the arts. Yeah, so yeah, we wouldn't want to be rewording that and taking things out that students have a right to be getting. That would be an unfortunate thing.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I do appreciate it. You had mentioned that there might be some confusion for teachers in following the law, and I would understand that concern, except there appears to be to me, and please, I'm curious if I'm misinterpreting something, Section 5, where the department shall develop guidelines as to how to follow this. Would that be something that the department would put out and then your organization could delineate to the teachers so they have those guidelines?
Our experience with the divisive concepts law was that the guidelines were not at all clarifying. They were very unhelpful. They did not explain the law in any way that was useful to teachers who were in the field, and did not answer questions in any further depth than the plain language of the law. So in our experience, no, it did not. Not only did it not alleviate the vagueness, those were part of the court evidence in the trial.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Mary Wilkie.
Thank you. My name is Mary Wilkie. I'm from Concord. I'm a retired public school teacher. I'm opposed to this bill. Right off the bat, I should say that when I went to school to become a teacher in the 1990s, critical race theory was never mentioned. I never heard of it until it came up in a bill a couple of years ago. Others have addressed I oppose this bill for a whole lot of reasons, but I have to limit what I have to say here. I would like to, one of the things that really concerns me is the cruelty of rhetoric that singles out LGBTQ people, and others have addressed that, so I'm going to move on. I just want to say that I think all students should deserve to be treated with respect and dignity and not singled out as if there was something incorrect or wrong with them. I'd like to speak to another ugly aspect of the bill, and that's its title. I realize that people were trying to make sure that they could turn it into the Charlie Act, so they had to find a way to have an acronym, and they came up with Countering Hate and Revolutionary Leftist Indoctrination in Education Act. As a person who taught school for 20 years and devoted those 20 years so much time, so much money, so much emotional investment, so much concern for every single child I ever had in my class. And by the way, I never had a single parent ever come to me and tell me they disagreed with something I had said in class or something their child had told them about. As a person who did that and knows so many other people who right now are doing the same thing, it is just heartbreaking to hear public school teachers addressed that way. It's slander by legislation, and it's been happening over and over again in recent years. It implies that public schools are filled with hateful teachers motivated by the desire to indoctrinate their students. If there are some teachers doing that somewhere, then deal with that. But you don't make a law that assumes that every single teacher in every single public school is doing that. I wish the sponsors of the bill would spend some time in actual public schools, and I mean some real time. Sit around for a few days and follow a few teachers and see what goes on. And you'll see that public school teachers are among the most compassionate people that you would ever meet. People who go extra miles for their students, and I mean that literally. We pick up kids to take them to concerts because their parents are at work and can't get them there. We deliver food and clothes to kids. We buy food to have in our classrooms because kids can't bring them for snacks. We cry when we find out that their parents are sick or that they themselves are sick. It's just, the bill talks about shared American values. Sorry, I have to end that sentence. Shoot. I would just like to say that shared American values include valuing public education back to Thomas Jefferson, and that's about all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you willing to take any questions?
Yes.
Representative Selig.
Thank you. And thank you for taking my question. If you were still teaching now, I believe you mentioned you were retired.
I am, yes.
If you were still teaching now, after reading all of the different distinctions about what is allowed and what isn't allowed, would you feel confident if students started asking questions about some of the topics in here to be able to answer?
No, I wouldn't. I would feel uncomfortable with some. I don't know what I would do if somebody was being made fun of because they were, for instance, gay. Am I allowed to say it's fine to be gay, or am I not allowed to say that? There are words in here that are, you can't engage in pedagogy, practice, or inculcation of critical theories or related practices. I don't know what those are. What are related practices? The examples include but are not limited to the following. So I don't know what else might be coming down the pike. It would make me very nervous.
Thank you.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I am also curious about the, on page 2, lines 26 through 28. We know historically throughout time, the LGBTQ culture has existed since as early as Roman time and through current history. So I guess my question to you is, at what point do we, I think as the previous question had laid out, is there a lack of acknowledgement of historical pretext to who we are as human beings?
Does this bill not fail to acknowledge those?
Correct. That's my question.
It does seem that way to me. And the idea that, I don't know what inculcating LGBTQ plus ideology is. What is that? Is that meaning that you think it's, that there are people who are LGBTQ? I don't even know what that means. And I agree with what you said, yes.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brian Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Brian Hawkins, representing NEA New Hampshire, here in opposition to House Bill 1792. I think a lot of what I had in my testimony has been said, so I'll try not to repeat it, but just to emphasize that we do think that this bill is incredibly difficult to follow. We would reiterate the vagueness of the bill, the lack of definition in the terms, and to the narrative that the bill seems to create just in what is suggested to be written into statute. And I think I can't capture it any better than some of the teachers who did behind me did. So I won't try to. The guidance for this sort of bill, for something that is this vague, it can't be written in an op-ed. That's not how we can guide what it is that we're seeking to prohibit here. And so what we do run the risk of with this bill is what we talked about and what was reported on in the teacher shortage committee from several years ago, which was the testimony that fear in teaching of controversial topics and critical thinking skills due to the passage of House Bill 2 in 2021, the banned concepts provision, has placed an unhealthy pall over teaching, and consequently the impact that has had on the retention of teachers and educators in the profession. So we would respectfully ask that you find House Bill 1792 inexpedient to legislate. And thank you for taking my testimony.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for taking my question. Would your organization believe that there might be any increase in your role with educators, given lines 31 through 35 exist in this bill, where it says an aggrieved person may bring a civil action against a school or a public employee? Sorry, and that's page 3. I apologize. And that's lines 31 through 35.
Certainly in the violation section. So certainly, I think one of the central problems with this is similar to what previous speakers have mentioned, which is the fear of either being, in this case, named in a lawsuit against the school, or the threat of licensure for something that you're not sure about how to comply with. So.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sean Locke.
Madam Chair. There we go. Thank you. First testimony of the year. So remembering how it works. Madam Chair and members of the Education Policy and Administration Committee, good afternoon. I am Senior Assistant Attorney General Sean Locke, testifying on behalf of the Department of Justice to provide some technical guidance regarding HB 1792. Just by way of personal background, I don't normally appear in this committee. I've been with the department for nearly 11 years, the first 4.5 as a prosecutor in our criminal bureau, and the last 6.5 leading our civil rights unit. It is in that role that I come to address some concerns we have regarding this legislation. State law in RSAs 354A, 27, and 28, as well as RSA 193-38, prohibit discrimination in public education. This includes discrimination on the basis of race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and sexual orientation and gender identity. It means that a school could not refuse to open its doors to students on the basis of those characteristics. It also means that schools cannot permit or foster environments that are hostile to students based on those characteristics, which effectively deny the student that public education. The proposed legislation jeopardizes a school's ability to redress these hostile environments, as they may impact students based upon their sexual orientation and gender identity. It may undermine a school's ability and obligation to foster a welcoming and inclusive educational environment because it creates a catch-22. So looking at page 2, lines 26 to 28, it prohibits requiring affirmation of LGBTQ+ identities. It creates liability for educators and districts that violate the law. In doing that, it may chill a school or educator's ability to address identity-based bullying, harassment, and other misconduct. With the proposed legislation, schools and educators may face liability for failing to address identity-based misconduct because it fosters a hostile environment, but they also may face liability if the steps they take to address that misconduct are deemed to have affirmed or require a student to affirm an LGBTQ+ identity. It creates a very difficult dynamic to navigate in that context. And the concern here isn't abstract. The data shows that identity-based misconduct leads to more extreme negative outcomes for students, including absenteeism, substance use, and negative mental health outcomes. And that's compared to misconduct directed at students based on non-identity-based or non-protected characteristics. So it's still dealing with bullying and harassment, but we're talking about when it's motivated or oriented around a student's identity. Although the legislation contains a carve-out for bullying prevention education, it doesn't appear to extend that to redressing misconduct. So there isn't a safe harbor here for a school or educator that's attempting to ensure that their students are learning in an environment that's free from hate, which is what the legislation was working to combat. That's the major concern that we came here to address. I'm sure there may be other questions, but I'm happy to take the questions from the committee.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming in front of us. So based on our discrimination laws, which are quite extensive, which is great, would you agree that a neutral environment for all students involved would be the ideal situation?
I think an environment where basically any student isn't feeling like they're being denied or isn't denied a public education because of their protected characteristics. And I say that protected characteristics work in all directions. So it's not just discriminating, it's not we've talked about oppressor-oppressed dynamics here. It's not just one group can discriminate against another. Discrimination can go in the other direction as well. And we say that. So everyone in this room holds protected characteristics of one sort or another. Whether or not that means what neutral might mean in that regard, I don't know. But the point here is that schools need the tools to redress discriminatory conduct or identity-based conduct, particularly when that occurs among students.
You have a follow-up? A true follow-up? Follow-up. Thank you. So based on that assumption, a neutral environment, and tell me if this is how you interpret it, a neutral environment to me would mean that there is no bias on either end. Everything is presented in a neutral, factual manner. Would that not be the same to you?
I think, if we're focusing on pedagogy, that's really not kind of the point of what I'm here to testify about. I'm talking about kind of tools to address conduct among students. I don't know that I I could speak to kind of how things are being taught. But I think the idea is what I'm really focused on is the ability of schools to address conduct among students.
Thank you.
Representative Drag.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. When I talked about safe harbors, I wasn't thinking about the environment of the school, but rather of what a teacher could do in the process of teaching, whereas good faith effort to abide by this and perhaps going over a line, but not in an intentional manner.
Right, and I know it wasn't really a question, but I'm going to respond to you. I didn't use safe harbor in the way that that you were kind of referring. I'd written those notes before you even brought up the idea of a safe harbor. That's what I meant, though, by a safe harbor, is the sense of, if there's some carve out where, a teacher acting in good faith to address misconduct isn't going to face sanction under this law if they're kind of acting in good faith.
Yes, follow up.
So is that a suggestion that could be a possibility of working that into this to allow a safe harbor?
It could be a possibility. It's something, we'd probably have to see what a final version looks like before I could speak with confidence, but it could be a way to address that particular concern I'm here raising.
Great, thank you.
Representative Selig.
Thank you. And Attorney Locke, it's lovely to see you again from my time on the Criminal Justice Committee where I met you previously. And thanks for taking my question. I'm looking specifically at page 3, line 31. where it talks about an aggrieved person may bring a civil action. And it says including a student or parent, but it doesn't say limited to in any capacity. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked someone previously who said they wouldn't be able to answer. But would an aggrieved person therefore be like the checkout person at the grocery store who overheard people talking about it, or a nosy neighbor, or how limiting is that, or open?
So generally, and this comes up in the law against discrimination, they talk about aggrieved kind of individuals, or a person aggrieved by unlawful discriminatory practice. It's usually referring to someone who is the target or directly affected by the unlawful discriminatory practice. So just the general public doesn't have standing to sue if an unlawful discriminatory practice occurs. That happens usually through state actors. So we have the authority to bring actions. The Human Rights Commission itself does. So I think in looking at this, it generally is going to kind of hew towards or be construed towards people directly affected by the unlawful act, as opposed to kind of anyone who happens to be aware of it occurring.
Follow up? Thank you. And staying with that same section, if, say, a student filed a complaint about, say, a custodian who was cleaning graffiti off a wall and making comments about the type of person who would have left the graffiti, and viewed that as violating this in some capacity, would that give them standing? I'm just trying to get clear on how far does this allow someone to go?
So I think it's also, in considering that, it's important to distinguish. An important distinction is filing a complaint versus having a meritorious complaint. So anyone can file, plenty of individuals can file complaints under different laws that exist. It doesn't necessarily mean those complaints have merit. So if someone can articulate how they've been aggrieved by whatever that conduct is, they may have the ability to file a complaint. It doesn't mean that upon investigation and kind of the end of kind of the civil or the litigation process that complaint is founded. And that's not really something that anyone can legislate around. People file complaints for hosts of reasons that are both meritorious and non-meritorious. It's just the nature of creating a right of action.
Thank you very much. Clearly, I need to review the determination of agreement.
Representative Murray.
Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I do have a question about the definition of worldview or worldview formation. One is found on page 1, line 27, and the other one on page 3, line 2. And I'm just curious to know, in your capacity, what that may involve, a worldview.
So you said the first definition's on page 1, and then what was the
first
second?
word? It's worldview formation, page 1, line 27.
Okay.
And then the next sort of iteration of it is worldview, page 3, line 2.
Okay. So in looking at this, I worry less about what's in the findings section because it doesn't become part of the statute. It's nice that it's there, but it doesn't really do anything. But the piece here kind of focusing on kind of this section looks like C, encouraging critical thinking, debate, or sympathy without mandating adoption of prohibited worldviews. In reading this, I would assume with how it's written, it refers back to kind of what's listed in the previous section as what the statute is targeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
And I conclude the hearing on House Bill 1792.